everybody, it's Leah, and today we're on day number 3 of our sourdough starter. Now, if you've been doing your sourdough starter along with us, or if you're trying to figure out possibly if you've done sourdough starters in the past but you haven't had success, what might be going on, I encourage you to listen to this entire video because there's a lot of discussion going on in here about points to look for with your starters, from smells to visuals to atmosphere. Something I wanted to point out here real quick, because I'm doing these videos kind of in an odd way for me for recording. So I might be a little bit redundant on these videos, and so you just have to bear with me on that, but it is kind of hard to film in this manner, and since I don't take notes. But in this particular video, again, we have some visual, we have a lot of tidbits for a successful starter. Something I wanted to point out too, and it was pointed out to me, I did not specifically say in these videos, I think I might have mentioned it in yesterday's video, to cover your starter. And that's kind of a major thing I just took for granted. I don't know if I took for granted that it would just be done, or if I just totally, because I do it, you know, and I do it so often, it just didn't occur to me to make it a point. But yes, you do need to cover your starter. I did discuss that, you know, I lost a starter this summer. We lost several, and some to gnats, and that is even with a lid on it. And that's because what happens, and I use the scenario, imagine bananas on your counter, gnats are drawn to it. So it doesn't matter if when you have them covered, certain things are going to find their way into it. You just have to be kind of vigilant on watching them. You do not want the lid to be on tight, because pressure does build up from the fermentation. You want that lid to be just resting on the top. I often just use when I'm using my gallon jars, I often just use a tea saucer and put on top. It fits kind of nice, but at the same time it allows air out. Your starter will still have a certain bit of oxidization coloration. It's just going to happen. It's nothing to be concerned about. But so if you see it, on day 2, day 3, and it looks discolored, it's probably just because of the air oxidization. Now, what happens when we discuss these things in this video, which we're getting ready to do right now? What happens if your starter does not look like mine on day 3? Chances are pretty good your temperature is a little bit different in your home and your environment than mine, and that's probably why it might look different. But don't be despaired. All you need to do, because we're still just at the beginning stages of starters, okay, of this starter, go ahead and feed it again. Do a 4th feed on it. Now by this time you're going to have to take some out, and you're probably just going to have to throw it out. I mean, that's just the way it works at this stage in the game. But you got to make room in your jar, or you're going to have a mess. I would probably feed it again for the 4th time, and then I would decide, do I need to get it towards a heat source to help get the initial activation going on? If you can. We discussed in yesterday's video possibly putting it near a pilot light or putting it near a heater vent, something to give it a little bit more oomph. If you can't do that, then just hang in there for the long haul and probably plan on another 5th feeding before you start to see the aeration and the activation in the yeast that you're going to see in this video. So, all right, so let's see. This is day number 3. It has not been a full 3 days. This would be the 2nd feeding, and you can tell how much this yeast is working. You'll also see down here there is quite a separation there of liquids. Now, on a whole wheat, oftentimes it will separate down at the bottom instead of on top, which is usually where it happens for white flour, or the liquid you start to get on top indicates that it really needs a feeding, depending on the temperature. There's all types of variations for this, so these are just some things that I have noticed. This is the thicker one. And again, now look, they're equal in size, variation. My point here is you aren't going to make too many mistakes in quantity of flour versus quantity of liquid. This is not a fine science. Again, your home environment, humidity, heat factor all plays a part into the activation of the yeast. I'm actually going to use one today to make sourdough pizzas, and I can use one to make bread. It's active enough to do that. Again, the point in sourdough, besides the fact that it's a natural yeast, is the flavoring, the microbes, the breaking down of the things that our body can't process, the healthy bacterias. So the more this can sit, the better sourdough flavor you're going to get if you like the stronger sourdough flavor. It will affect certain density of your bread, but it is not a make or break. You can let that dough from your bread, if you're using it real quick, sit even longer. So you're still going to get a rise from it. But this is, at this point, I can either pour my starter off and then feed it and set it back aside, or lots of times for me, I'm sorry, I wasn't going to do it this soon. I was at least going to comb my hair, but I saw that the yeast is activating, and I'm going to be using it very quickly to get the dough going for our sourdough pizza crust. But for me, with the sourdough, if I use it, go ahead and use the yeast. It's activated, it's good. I can even feed it and then go ahead and pour it off, because here's the thing: when you use sourdough yeast, you let your dough set anyways, and so you add a certain amount of flour with your liquids. I use water and oil and the yeast. Those are my liquids, and then I'll just set it aside for a while and let it sit, and then I'll continue to add the flour to it to get the dough consistency I want. I can't emphasize enough that this is just some trial and experimenting to gain experience. Allow yourself room for mistakes, and allow yourself room to find out what works best for you in this process. All right, so I'm just getting ready to put this into my pizza dough mixture that I was telling you about earlier, and I haven't fed it yet. I'm going to feed the starter after I get the dough or the starter out that I want, but I wanted to show you how this is elasticy now, and that's the yeast itself, the natural yeast working. So I punched the air out of it when I first stirred it. And I'll try to get the second one on camera when I do it. I'm not ready to feed that yet. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use some from both starters, because if I feed this second starter now without getting rid of some of it, I will guaranteed to have a mess later today. So I just want you to see what happens when this is all aerated and you go to stir it up a little bit. Again, that's elasticy. It's exactly what you want. The starter looks real healthy. See a little bit of aeration there still. I didn't stir it all out yet. Okay, so on the starters, one thing you want to do is get yourself familiar with the smell of a starter. When you first start, for the first day or two, you're going to think, I'm going to get in the right light here, you're going to think it just smells like a paste, because it's just the flour and the water. But after probably about 48 hours, you're going to notice it's going to smell just a little bit different, and it should smell a little bit tart. Some can be a very strong tart. It takes longer typically than 48, 72 hours to get to that stage. And that's okay if it does smell a really strong tart. That means that your bread's going to have a stronger flavor. What you're looking for smells that you might be concerned about, fingernail polish smell, like an acetone smell is what it always reminded me of. Here's a good one, and you can't miss it. If your tartar ever smells like vomit, get rid of it. That is a bad smell. But typically, I have opened up tartars or starters before, and they've been so tart that they burnt my nose. But it wasn't an offensive smell. Okay, it was just a startling strong smell. So that kind of, keep those things in mind when you're determining the smells. Just because something is strong and startling does not mean that it's offensive. Okay, once you get to the offensive stage, if your starter is offensive, it's gone south. You don't want to mess with it. You want to start all over. So these starters right now, they're got a slight tartness to it. Not real strong, but they're not very old, so they're not going to be, you know, real strong. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to feed them just like I have for the past 2 days. For those of you that are going to refrigerate your starters, I would recommend you feed them another couple times and then go ahead and put them in your refrigerator until you're ready to use them. If you're ready to use it, you can go ahead and use some of it, feed it again, leave it on your counter, not near too direct heat, because now that the microbes are working and the yeast is doing its thing, to keep it by the heat too directly and without any type of cooler, you know, if you're not going to keep it in the refrigerator, you're going to encourage the negative bacteria, and that's what you do not want. All right, so I'm not going to show you about feeding the starter again because I've already shown you in video 1 and 2. You guys know how to do it. But what we need to talk about is this. Again, starters and their ability to perform the job they're supposed to do is totally different from home to home because it depends on the moisture in your home, the humidity, you know, the humidity, the heat levels, what kind of bacteria you have floating in the air. It also has to do with the amount of moisture in your flour. And this is where, this is true, this is where I keep saying it doesn't matter if you do, you know, a little more liquid to a little more flour. Depending on what's going on in your flour, you can have more liquid in there and it can take longer. It's really not that big of an issue. I did want to throw that out there though, in case some of the sourdough purists are going, oh, but it absolutely does matter. But the most important thing is just to realize that you're learning the environment in your home when it comes to harvesting natural yeast. Let's see, what else should we discuss here at this point? Okay. So if you have been doing your sourdough starter right along with me, and your starter is at the stage where mine is at, what you need to do now is decide how often you're going to use it. If you're going to use it regularly, you're going to need to feed it regularly. You'll read these recipes or hear these people say, when you feed it, you need to throw part of it out. That's crazy, all right? When you feed it, you should be using part of it instead of throwing it out. And the reason some people say throw it out is because when you're feeding that, if your container's not big enough, you get a mess. That stuff is horrible when it overflows. So it's to get yourself in a pattern to use that starter as often as you need to. If you bake a lot, a few times a week, it's going to be enough. You know, feeding it each time you feed it, it's going to be a good time to use it. If you don't use it all the time, let it go dormant in the refrigerator. Occasionally take a look at it. Like I said, last summer was the only time I was able to ever use a refrigerator since I've been doing sourdough starter. I mean, a refrigerator, and how long has that been since I've had a refrigerator? I guess I haven't had a refrigerator in 15 years. I don't know. So last year was the only experience I had, and I was down there 2 months. And it was really great because as far as it was a really hot summer, I wasn't real sure how my sister's house was going to be for my starter. I took it down with me. I'd had that starter for a long time, and I didn't want to lose it. It was a really good starter. So I put it in the refrigerator, and I would take it out. Like if I was going to make bread in the morning, I would take it out at night, and you can feed it then, but normally what I would do is I would let it warm up overnight, and before I had my coffee, I would feed it. And within a couple hours, the starter was ready. You could tell that it was activated, and it was ready to use. If you're going to make your bread at night, like if you're going to make your dough and let your sourdough rise overnight, then you would take it out in the morning. I'm trying to think. It seems like I probably I was really busy down there, so I wasn't cooking as much. I wasn't cooking hardly at all as far as bread goes. I did a few batches, and it seems like I could get away with at least 2 weeks before I worried about feeding it, maybe even 3. Her refrigerator was really cold. I guess I should put that in there. Her refrigerator was super cold. It wasn't freezing, but it was cold. And it really helped with keeping that sourdough starter dormant, which I imagine if you have a refrigerator like that, there should be really no worry about losing that starter at all. If you're doing it more room temperature, you have to be more vigilant. Okay, now I want to add this on to this video. This is going to go totally against all sourdough purists, and in my brain too, because I'm very comfortable with the sourdough, it would go against my innards. But in reality, I understand, and this is why I recommend this for anybody that's not comfortable doing sourdough starters yet. For anybody that one of the drawbacks for some people is the continual feeding. You can do the sourdough starter just when you need it. Just plan 3 or 4 days in advance to get that starter going, so that when it comes to the time for you to make your bread, you have it. Now that you lose a lot of certain benefits, you lose the sourdough taste, you lose a portion of the yeast activation, but in the end, it's still going to give you what you want, as well as get you comfortable and get you working with something that you otherwise have reasons you don't want to work with. You don't want the continual taking care of. You don't want to have to worry about it going bad, putting all that work into it. I know that sounds crazy, but it is a possibility, an option, especially just to get you comfortable with using it. So in this situation, let's say you wanted to make bread on Saturday, you'd probably start your starter no later than Tuesday, possibly Monday, and you would feed it 3 or 4 times before you use it. You would not have to use make a big batch of it, obviously, a quart-sized jar, and then you would use the whole thing. Now, and we'll talk about this portion tomorrow, but I do want to say here, when I first started using sourdough, it was just, oh, just use a cup for your recipe. Not now. Man, I just pour the sourdough in, because it's basically a sponge, and that's what you are making when you're using the sourdough yeast and you add your flour, you got a sponge going on. I love to utilize my sourdough starter in that way, a good portion of it. I don't measure it out. Sometimes I'll dump a whole gallon in if I have it. I have one viewer who was a cook up at a deer camp, and he talked about making sourdough in a 5-gallon bucket. And when I read that, I thought, man, that's what I should be doing, is making the sourdough in a 5-gallon bucket, because then I wouldn't hardly need to add any other liquid. But again, I just re-emphasize here that there's no 100% this is the way it has to be. All right, you get comfortable with your yeast, learn how you like it, learn how your home environment reacts to it, and you're going to be good to go. So, all right, so for this video, that's where I'm going to end it, but I want to tell you this. I said in video 1, we were going to do something here on YouTube that probably, as far as I know, no other channel has done this on sourdough yet. We're going to let one of our 2 sourdoughs that we started go bad, and I'm going to record each day. I haven't decided. I'll decide tomorrow, I guess, if when I take the video, if it's worth doing a few minute pop-up video, or if I'm going to compile 5 or 6 or 7 days, because it probably won't take, if I leave it out nearer the heat, which I might, to encourage it going bad in the different stages, 5-7 days before it goes bad, and I wouldn't recommend using it. But I want to show you guys the different stages of what to look for, so you can feel confident and know that when you are using your starter, when you're considering using your starter, that maybe what you see that doesn't look quite right to you because you're not familiar with it actually is fine. And then you will know the stages if I show them to you, or at least have a good idea of stages that you don't want to mess with the sourdough. So, all right, if you enjoyed this video and it was helpful for you, please be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment below. We love to hear from you. Share this video on social media. Again, it gets out in front of people that normally would not find our channel and that might enjoy our videos. We will talk soon. God bless.